welcome to my art form.
It's time for Post-Orthodoxy, a show about changing our minds.
Yeah, baby.
With your hosts, Dark and Ainsley Sevier.
Maybe what they believe about reality isn't all of reality.
What?
I know, right?
We're on a mission to have a better time with more people more often.
The question is more like, how do you get there?
Post-Orthodoxy explores strongly held beliefs, how those belief systems divide or connect people, and what might be found beyond those reality bubbles.
Keep calm. Don't lose your head.
I've got a piece of chocolate here with me because I got anxiety about doing this.
Welcome to this neighborhood, neighbor.
Welcome to Post-Orthodoxy Season 3, Episode 2.
Here we are.
I'm your host, Jacques Sevier. This is our co-host, Ainsley Sevier.
And our special guest. We're bringing our special guest on in a minute.
Right.
Ladies and gentlemen, we've set up so much cool stuff in advance of our first Zoom guest of Season 3. But one thing that I forgot to change was the title of this video. This is Episode 2.
Oh boy.
It's not Episode 1, welcome back.
Uh-huh.
It's Episode 2, and we're very grateful to have Professor Fabio Vighi from Cardiff.
Yes.
But he's Italian. That's what I know about him so far. I'm the double blind. Dark's done a ton of research, and we're very excited to have this guest. So this is Episode 2. Thank you for joining us. And now we're going to bring our guest on.
Do we want to do our disclaimer for the show?
Oh yeah, we better do a disclaimer, guys. Okay, because I
know we're in rough times.
I had a mental breakdown just this weekend about a strongly held belief of mine that was confronted by some scientific data, and it reminded me how important it is to let you guys know that this conversation is specifically for people who are already wondering what's going on. And if you're not wondering what's going on, you might find this conversation to be primally scary. It might cause you to feel defensive. We ask questions about all the things that you're not supposed to ask questions about. Anything that's dogmatic, we like to challenge. We like to introduce reasonable doubt into lockdown belief systems and perspectives on reality in every sphere. That might be marriage, religion, politics, science, history, etc.
Sounds good. So view at your own discretion.
But do participate if you'd like to. You could be a friend of the show or a frenemy of the show. Either way, we are streaming on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitch, and we have a bot set up that will take your comments and put them all in the center for everybody to participate in. And we do this because we want to be having a conversation with you guys. So thank you so much to everybody who's going to join today. And now,
welcome to the show.
Fabio
Vighi, live from.
I'm now live.
From
Are you in Cardiff?
I'm in Cardiff, yes.
Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for inviting me. Pleasure to be here.
This is really exciting. I was mentioning in our little prequel show, our little prequel before the show, that you're the first person that we've interviewed on Post-Orthodoxy that neither Dark nor I have ever met.
Right. You came into my field of view because, as I was saying before we went live, for the rest of the audience out there, we finished off Season 2, where I felt like I was burnt out on what I call the coronavirus narrative. It's a bit crazy making, perceptually destabilizing. And we've spent the last 2 years trying to get, things don't seem right. Our spidey sense has been going off. So we've been having to educate ourselves on everything from data analysis to psychology and emerging ideas about the psychology of this virus, economic questions, medical questions, establishment questions, alternative questions. And really, it feels like a lot of mosquitoes to me. There's been so much crazy making, information, misinformation, disinformation, changing definitions of words that the final episode, I was like, I'm done with this. We know who's doing this. It's the same fuckers who did the subprime mortgage crisis. It's the same fuckers who have been fucking this for a long time. The same people are getting rich, and the same people are getting screwed.
That does seem to be the case.
And if you take the coronavirus narrative off, it's the same story that's just been going on with coronavirus.
And then along came Fabio, and he was like, all of those things, but in a really beautiful article.
Right. I want to come out the gate. We're going to come out the gate swinging because I want to read a paragraph from this piece. I'd like to. The piece that I read was a self-fulfilling prophecy, systemic collapse, and pandemic simulation. This is from the Philosophical Salon. I don't know if that's the website that is part of.
He could tell you
the Los Angeles Review of Books, or if that's what it is. So I found this. I don't know where I found you. Somebody on Twitter probably. But I found the article and I read it and I'm like, oh boy, he's the guy who says all the things that I haven't been. It's like all the things got stitched together with that piece for me. And there's one paragraph that I want to read, and then I would like you to tell me about it. And the paragraph goes like this: the mainstream narrative should therefore be reversed. The stock market did not collapse in March 2020 because lockdowns had to be imposed. Rather, lockdowns had to be imposed because financial markets were collapsing. With lockdowns came the suspension of business transactions, which drained the demand for credit and stopped the contagion. In other words, restructuring the financial architecture through extraordinary monetary policy was contingent on the economy's engine being turned off. Had the enormous mass of liquidity pumped into the financial sector reached transactions on the ground, the monetary tsunami, a monetary tsunami with catastrophic consequences would have been unleashed. That is a lot for, I think, most folks who watch the regular news.
That's the message, really, in a kind of condensed. That's the condensed message that I wanted to, to people to hear, because I think that's really crucial. Do you want me to ask? Do you want to ask a question, or shall I just elaborate? Or?
I do. I wanted to start with this paragraph because that statement that the stock market didn't collapse because of the lockdowns, but rather were created. Yeah. The virus was the narrative was created,
right,
because of the financial situation. Yes, please tell me how that is the case.
How did you come by that perspective?
It's interesting because I've been working in philosophy, right, recently, kind of fairly abstract theories, psychoanalysis, Hegelian philosophy, and so on, right? I was writing a book and so on about it, but I've kind of found myself doing a bit of kind of investigative journalism about this, because all of a sudden I came across some documents that confirmed to me what I suspected, and that's that in 2019, the system was on the verge of another 2008, basically, right? Was really close to collapsing, but I think the collapse would have been much bigger than 2008, much more traumatic, because obviously in the meantime, the financial sector had been inflated hugely through QE policies, 11 years of basically the central bank, the Fed pumping money into the financial sector. So massive inflation of the financial sector between 2008 and 2019. And I came across some documents, first of all, by by BlackRock. And it's interesting to see how BlackRock, which is the largest investment fund in the world, right? It manages about, at the moment, it's about $10 trillion, right? It manages that much money, which is, I mean, it's almost, it's almost impossible to think. It's 10 plus 12 zeros.
Well, that's such a benign that they're they manage things.
They manage it.
It sounds pretty benign.
Yeah.
And I would like you to maybe tease out a little bit who BlackRock is, who Vanguard is, and what kind of power do they have in the world that we live in?
I think they are the equivalent of world government, basically, right? They are at the top, simply because they manage so much money, and they are they kind of invest everywhere. So shareholders in all the big companies that you can think of, from Apple. If you look at sort of Yahoo Finance or something, and you type in Apple or whatever, you will see that the major shareholders are always the same guys, Vanguard, BlackRock, almost inevitably. So they control them effectively, right? Because they have such a huge control of the money.
So they're not just managing assets; they're really driving narrative.
Right. Yeah. So basically, going back to what I was saying, in the summer of 2019, they issued this interesting document called dealing with the next downturn. And we are well before the virus, obviously.
Right.
They're talking about a coming downturn, and they say, look, Fed, you have to do this if you want to stop or to deal with the next recession, which is coming. So they knew that the inflation of the financial sector had become unsustainable, right? With what they were doing at the time, full of junk, full of toxic assets, and there was nothing to do really, apart from finding some kind of a way out that obviously would work in terms of creating some kind of extreme narrative or extreme solution, even in terms of monetary policy. And they suggested basically to the Fed, or suggested is a euphemism, right? They told the Fed basically that they needed extraordinary monetary policy. So they needed, basically, they said they need to print more money and give it directly to those who need it, private spenders, public spenders in the financial market who are going under. And they desperately need cash, cash that is created out of nowhere, incidentally, right? This is not cash that comes from the real economy. It's cash that is created out of nowhere, literally, by the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve has this power to create money out of nowhere and to give it to the people, it has 24 primary dealers in Wall Street, and national and international, so American, like Bank of America, JP Morgan, Goldman Sachs, but also international. So you get, for example, Deutsche Bank, etc. And basically they were saying you need to find a way to give them a huge amount of money to prevent the whole system from collapsing.
So giving the money to the banks.
To the banks, yeah.
Okay.
So, yeah, basically that's what they were saying, to prevent the coming tsunami, because they saw that coming.
And when you say tsunami, can you tell me what would a systemic collapse look like?
What would have happened if they hadn't invented a bunch of money and given it to the overlords?
Right.
Yeah.
It basically means that you get a kind of a series, a domino effect of defaults within the financial sector. So you get, typically it starts with a liquidity trap. So all of a sudden, people who normally lend money stop lending because the conditions for lending are not there. For example, interest rate go up or whatever. And that causes a domino effect that reaches eventually the real economy. So the problem would have the contagion, to use a term that I think that is very useful here, the contagion would have reached the real economy to the extent that perhaps you wouldn't have been able to draw money from the cash point, because all of a sudden there was no money around. And that, of course, would have led to civil war, I'd say. It would have led to chaos, and a kind of chaos that is difficult to manage. So I think the situation was quite dramatic, and to get BlackRock to say something like you've got to find an unusual, an unconventional monetary policy to stem this tide, which is coming, it's quite remarkable. And not only BlackRock, but also the Bank of International Settlements, which is the central bank of all central banks. It's kind of organizes, and it's based in Switzerland and so on. So there's a number of events that took place before that already were signaling that the situation was getting much worse, and that's 2019. Then there's the G7 meeting in Wyoming, where the bankers, the central bankers normally meet, and they discuss this kind of monetary policy. They say, okay, so what do we have to do here? Let's have a discussion about. Basically, they're discussing BlackRock's document, about what to do to stop this.
Some unusual recession. Policy, yes.
Yeah, unusual policy, to use another euphemism, and basically a month later, so in September 2019, mid-September 2019, you get a liquidity trap, exactly what happened in 2008, in 2007, to kickstart the Great Recession of 2008. Liquidity trap in the repo market. the repo market is quite a central, important, very important market within the financial sector, where basically it's a kind of lending market where banks and financial institutions lend each other money at very low rates, interest rates, and it's normally overnight. So basically, you lend money during the day, and within 24 hours, you're paid back that money. In the meantime, those who've borrowed the money use it to speculate on other markets, like derivatives market, which is a huge galaxy. We don't even know how much money there is in the derivatives market and other markets. So it's really a crucial market, and huge in terms of the amount of money that is exchanged there. The repo stands for repurchase agreement. So it's an agreement to repurchase the money that you lend, that you borrow within, normally overnight. So it's like within 24 hours. So basically that got blocked. There was a liquidity trap there. They stopped lending, basically, right? And that caused panic. And it takes very little. If the system is already in trouble, we're talking about a hyper-indebted system, but borrowing is crucial. Borrowing at low rates is crucial for all the rest. It's like a massive Jenga, If you take a piece and you take it off wrongly, everything collapses. Mm-hmm. So that's my kind of the metaphor that I think explains what might happen if something goes wrong in a very crucial, part of the financial sector. You can think of it as a castle of cards, a house of cards built on a pool of gasoline. It takes very little for it to explode. Yeah, that's another image that will give you the idea.
That's bad. It was really bad.
And I think what was going on, what went on actually with the repo market crisis was the event, in a sense, that would have caused kind of collapse within the system itself. As I said, it would have made 2008 look like a walk in the park. So that's the kind of dimension that we're talking about here. So It was necessary to do something about it, and effectively, as soon as that happened, the Fed came in and started printing money by the cartload. So they started printing billions on a weekly basis. And now we know that, because some research has been done, some figures have come out. We know exactly that the Fed started printing not after COVID, but before COVID. So they started printing all this money in September 2019. Between September 2019 and July 2020, the Fed printed $11.23 trillion.
Which is not even
an astonishing.
People can't conceptualize
that doesn't do anything to my brain. It just becomes an abstract.
I know exactly. It's like, Kant, the German philosopher Immanuel Kant would have called it kind of mathematical sublime. It's kind of unimaginable.
Right.
I can't imagine it. I don't know what that.
Trillions of dollars, and where did the trillions of dollars? Where did those dollars?
We're talking trillions
go?
For me. Yeah.
Where did it go?
Oh, it went. Now we know that it went to the banks that needed it. It went to the Deutsche Bank. It went to the usual suspects, the J.P. Morgan and Goldman Sachs, etc., because they were exposed, right? They were exposed, and clearly.
So the Fed printed the money because the banks were too big to fail. Right. It's that story again,
right? And they called it going direct. Obviously that was a term that was used by BlackRock. So BlackRock said, you've got to find a way of going direct, of giving this money directly. Put this money directly in the hands of these spenders, those people who need it, to avoid the coming downturn, as they call it, right? And so then we get the repo crisis. I'm not sure the extent to which that repo crisis was accidental or by design. I'm not sure. Because it seemed to be the perfect accident, for the Fed to intervene, to start creating this money out of nowhere. But clearly, in a sense, they needed something else, right? And that's where the pandemic comes in. And why do they need something else, right? I mean, this becomes very counterintuitive, because people normally think capitalism is all about consuming, consumption, and creating consumption. It has been like that for many years. But all of a sudden, if you think they pump so much money into the system, to the financial sector, the moment this money starts to leak into the real economy, and the real economy is, as we know, is based on credit. Everybody needs credit, needs money.
When you say the real economy, that's mortgages, car loans.
Well, the retail economy, whatever we think, our economy, the economy as we understand it. Like, I don't particularly understand the financial sector, rather I'm kind of learning about it, but the economy for us is the everyday life economy, And, so the money coming down from the financial sector into the real economy, all that money would have caused hyperinflation, right? And hyperinflation is something that BlackRock warned about in that document too, right? In that document, they said, okay, we need to find a way of controlling or avoiding hyperinflation, avoiding situations, and they mentioned situations like Weimar in the 20s, where you had to go, with a
wheelbarrow.
The wheelbarrow?
Bags of dollars to buy a bit to buy bread. And
so that's what it looked like could have happened with those $11 trillion.
Yes.
So wait.
Simply because the mass of money thrown into the system is so huge, and it's additional money out of nowhere. It's not money that comes from the real economy. It's not money that comes from profits and so on. It's money that it's added to the money that is already circulating. So the moment that new mass of money begins to circulate at high velocity in the real economy, you get inflation or potentially hyperinflation, right? So and I think they were aware of it, and they said, "Sorry, I was going to stop here before you."
No, go ahead.
So basically, they needed to find a way of, and this is a phrase that I've read in a document by the Bank of International Settlement, saying literally, we've got to find a way of insulating the real economy. So the term to insulate the real economy,
what does that mean?
It's it gives it away, doesn't it? It really suggests that and insulating the real economy is what COVID did. Lockdowns, restrictions of all sorts, and they're still doing it in many ways. Lockdowns are by definition deflationary, right? They are measures that stop money from circulating too fast. So they prevent.
Okay.
Yes.
Great. Recap.
Recap. Sorry,
no, that's
gone
okay.
too far.
No, this is great. So there's the quote unquote normal economy, and I grew up really Republican, so I was taught about trickle down.
Yeah.
That if bosses have money, then employees have money. So we really want the bosses to have money. Otherwise, the employees won't have any. And then when the lockdowns happened and they gave money to the people, it was like, oh, it's almost like if the people don't have money, then businesses don't get anything purchased. And then it's actually like almost like it's more like bubble up finances was what I was seeing, practically speaking, on my end as a citizen. But what you're saying is, there was the normal economy sort of pooping along, and then something was getting so bad that they decided to add a shit ton of money.
That's to the banks.
To the up here.
Yeah.
To the banks, so that it could sort out their issues. Yeah.
So first of all, what problem were they trying to solve by giving money up here? Initially, pre-lockdowns.
Yeah, I mean, obviously they need money so that they can continue to invest, they can continue to speculate, and that they can continue to hold on to kind of create the illusion that the value created in the financial sector is real value, right? It's all speculations. We know it's a house of cards, right? It depends on this constant speculation. If something goes
feels
wrong,
like drug addiction. It feels like a drug addiction. What do you do after $11 trillion? Like, what? Does it get better from there?
They continue to speculate and to invest and and so on. So the moment that there's a problem, insofar as, for example, there's a liquidity trap and money doesn't circulate fast enough, everything collapses potentially, right, in the financial sector, and then the repercussions. So we feel the repercussions down on the ground as well of all that.
So this
simply
is something...
because the other point I wanted to add here is that the situation now is that the financial sector is the driving force of the whole economy. It used to be the opposite.
Financial sector is Wall Street. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, Wall Street, fundamentally
Okay.
Wall Street, but
Right.
also in other parts of the world, but fundamentally Wall Street. Yes, the New York force.
Yeah.
But what I'm trying to say is that there's a massive disproportion between the value created in the financial sector and the value created in the real economy. We can talk about it a bit later, but just to give you an idea, that there's a huge disproportion. So if something goes wrong at the top, we get squashed at the bottom, basically, right? We get destroyed at the bottom very quickly. And that's the paradox, that it needs to be kept alive, it needs to be kept going, because otherwise we all suffer huge consequences. Mm-hmm. So we kind of snookered ourselves, right? After years and years of wild speculative capitalism, effectively, we have snookered ourselves, that we depend
What word
so
is that?
much on this.
Oh, snookered.
Yeah. Sorry, snookered is. You know what snooker is?
Like pulled one over on yourself. Like you tricked yourself. You.
Yeah, we kind
fucked
of
yourself over.
Right. Yeah. That's the idea.
Snookered.
Obviously, snooker is a UK sport. I don't know. Yeah.
It's like pool.
Where you're deadlocked, effectively, right? You don't know what to do next to get out of the problem. So, I think hyperinflation was a real possibility, and they had to create an emergency, a global emergency that would stop money circulating too fast. And I don't want to speculate further on how they created it, or whether
how many parts
it's impossible.
are
it's impossible
real?
for me to say.
Right,
it's impossible for me to say. But it's clear. I think if you join the dots, you clearly see that there's a very interesting kind of chronological order there in what was happening in 2019, and then the virus came to kind of help them out of trouble, effectively, because through the virus and through the restrictions and so on, they could freeze the real economy to an extent, right? They could turn the engine off, literally, of the real economy, slow down at least hugely the real economy, prevent money from circulating too quickly, and sort out all the issues that they had in the financial sector by printing more money and throwing it into the financial sector. And one of the things people think often is that the money you throw into the financial sector stays there, right? That stays there. But the banks lend it into the real economy, and so it begins to circulate there as well. Anyway.
Okay,
we can discuss the nitty-gritty if you want.
So growing up a little baby Christian Republican,
right.
I was like, free market is king. And my understanding of the free market was a citizen-based understanding of the free market. I didn't have a concept of the Federal Reserve, or the fact that all money in America is debt to the Federal Reserve and doesn't truly exist or have anything it's based on. And so for me, I was like, free market is great, because that means I can have a muffin shop and my friend can have a muffin shop. And if my muffins are better and I have better deals, people will buy my muffins more than they will buy my friend's muffins. That's the way it should be. If my friend ends up being an asshole to someone, their friends aren't going to go buy muffins from her anymore, You
talked about a trickle-down economy, right? That's the message that we got for many years. That those profits eventually come down to us. They help everybody, right? Which is not even necessarily true, but it works as a fantasy, at least. No, we can all feel kind of.
It would be nice.
Yeah. It's quite nice. But here we have a different problem, right? Because the real big profits are not made in the real economy any longer. The big profits are made in the financial sector.
In these app games.
And the financial sector needs constantly help from the Federal Reserve in terms of money printing, and therefore potential money devaluation, because the more money there is and the more money that reaches the ground creates potentially inflation or deflation. Depends on but in both cases, it's money devaluation. It's a great devaluation, which means that your money is worth less and less and less and less. which is actually what's going on today. Today we already have inflation. The moment you open the economy, of course you were going to have inflation. It's something that they knew. I mean, that's why I'm saying it's not by accident but by design, because they must have known that the moment the after all that money they throw into the system, the moment they reopen, they get inflation. And you know that in the States now you've got 7%, in Europe you've got 5% inflation.
So now Paul on YouTube asked, isn't this just pushing the crisis off a little bit? Like, haven't we just pushed,
we haven't solved the problem.
No, they just pushed it forward.
It's kicking the can. It's really it's kicking the can. They not wanting to see the crisis, pretending that it's not there, denying that we have a problem with the system, that the system is not working any longer as it used to work. Maybe, I don't know, for a few decades at least after the end of the war, it did work, or at least it had some kind of appeal, and also some it did work for a lot of people at least. And now it's not even. The middle classes are disappearing, basically, right?
So what happened during the subprime mortgage crisis? They gave out a bunch of loans to people.
Was that 2008?
2007?
It's the bailout. The idea that they were bailed out by the bank. The banks were bailed out, and once again, right? Of course, we all hate the fact that we had to bail out the banks. The problem is that if we let the banks fail, there's a domino effect on the whole of society, right? So we created a system we created a very perverse system, which requires these big banks to continue to make their speculations and with the help of the Federal Reserve. Otherwise, large parts of society are wiped out because we depend so much on, as I said, on the financial sector.
What happened?
So we need to.
I'm sorry to interrupt.
No, carry on.
Because for me, I have a very visual brain, and so I want to see if I'm understanding what you're saying. Otherwise, I start to get backlogged in information.
Yes.
In the subprime mortgage crisis, a bunch of people who normally wouldn't get loans got loans. Is what happened particularly in Los Angeles. So a lot of people who wouldn't get loans got loans. They could get a house. And then in the mortgage crisis, their houses, everybody went underwater. A lot of people went underwater, which just means that they bought their house and now it was instantly, they owed more than the house was worth.
Right.
When that happened and the bank foreclosed on the homes, and what happened in Los Angeles is instead of having lots of residences, you now had rentals owned by the banks, and it became harder for people to actually get that step into financial security, which is often just buying a house. So when that happened, when they started talking about the lockdowns, we were talking about on our show, I'm like, this is going to be just like that crisis, and people are going to be out of work. When it went past 2 weeks, I'm like, people are going to be out of work. We're going to start losing businesses. We're going to start losing houses, and the banks, Vanguard, BlackRock, is just going to come through and buy everything. Yeah. Now, it seems like that's not a bad deal for them.
Yeah, of course it's not. No, it's a good deal for them. They siphon, they take all they kill the small businesses or the medium-sized businesses, and then they just absorb them, right? Because
it's like what the USA did to countries all around the world. They give them loans, they can't afford it, and then they privatize everything.
Yeah. Yes, right. Yeah. The problem now they have, it's the additional problem they have now is that they are so dependent on money printing that, I go back to my point that so they've inflated so much the financial sector that they know that can create hyperinflation also down on the ground, and that would mean something very nasty, something that they don't want to do. They don't want empty stomachs. They don't want people to go hungry. Because people can do nasty things.
They'll start breaking things then.
They can start breaking things and looting and all the rest of it, and social chaos can emerge. So they don't want that to happen. And I think emergency, what I call emergency capitalism, it's a new type of effectively of a capitalist system whereby we're going to see more and more monetary control from above, from central banks particularly, and more and more kind of cynical use of emergencies, so-called emergencies, to create so that allows them to control people, to control money in various ways. So I'm not surprised that we're still here 2 years later. Like Europe is under siege almost. There's lockdowns again. People are losing jobs if they don't take the vaccine. They're creating a condition almost like a neo-feudal type of capitalism, I would say, where very few are in control, of the money above, and the others are deprived of rights, controlled more and more under surveillance. And I think eventually they will be forced to this kind of rent economy, where basically they don't own anything, they have to rent everything, and they have to abide, to the rules that
and you'll be
happy. Imposed on them.
Apparently. You will own nothing, and you will like it.
Right. I think that's really when they launched that slogan, right? You own nothing and you'll be happy. They had to remove it straight away because clearly they made a mistake there. They shouldn't have allowed themselves to say that because it's not real. Mm-hmm. It's too real to be shown to the people. So I started talking about it, and a few weeks later, I remember it wasn't there any longer. They removed
disappeared.
It. Disappeared. Yeah. But yeah, basically, what they envisage is a kind of world where very few people are in control of the monetary flow, and all the others, in one way or another, have to be reduced to.
This is very important. We're talking about the World Economic Forum. Is who we're talking about.
Yeah, this is the World Economic Forum.
It would be great if they were benevolent dictators.
Well, they're talking like a Star Trek civilization where everything is amazing except the oligarchs are still in control. They're using the great language, but they're still not giving up power. It's still there's no equity involved in their story.
No, so it's a control society. I mean, I think it's a totalitarian society ultimately that they have in mind. They're just trying to paint a picture where, wow, if you do that, you can save the planet. Or if you do certain things, you'd have to do certain things. You'd be convinced to do certain things, to sacrifice your freedom, your basic freedoms, in order, to do a good thing.
I have
something that is sold as a good thing.
I have so many directions I want to go in right now. I have to reel it all back in because there's so much to cover. I think there's things that we just talk about the World Economic Forum. I don't think a lot of people know what the World Economic Forum is. And who is the World Economic Forum compared to BlackRock? Is this the hitmen for BlackRock? Are they rival gangs or what?
There's a system of revolving doors at that level, where everybody is in everybody else's pockets, basically, right? They're all exchanging. And the World Economic Forum is one of those organizations. They meet in Davos, in Switzerland, in this very luxury location. And they have these mega meetings. They invite philosophers and, people to talk about the future. I don't know. I mean, the guy obviously who started it and who's directing operations is this guy called Klaus Schwab.
I wish you could pull up that picture of his spaceman outfit.
I'll do it.
Yeah, there's some interesting, but I haven't done too much research into it. But I'm sure it's something that, like, who's at the top. It'd be interesting to see who's really at the top. You can think about the top. I mean, we don't know who really owns BlackRock, for example. We don't really know that. I mean, there's a bunch of people who are in control of it, but we don't know exactly who they are.
We don't know who controls an entity that is more powerful than many governments combined. That's what you're saying.
Yeah, I mean, there's
sounds like a conspiracy.
It's not exactly
theory.
Clear. The CEO is Larry Fink and all the rest of it, and he has a lot of power and blah blah blah. But really, who's behind the scenes there? Who's directing operations? You can go back to kind of families like the Rockefeller and Rothschilds. They're still around, and they're still very, very much very powerful
in the game.
They're very much in the game, and probably that there are conflicts at the top as well between these very, very powerful people. So some want to go in a certain direction, some others will go in a different direction. So maybe that's our best chance in many ways, right? That they're not clear themselves about what the future will be. Some of them, like Schwab, is very clear. He's written a few books about the Great Reset and the way in which we will own nothing and be happy. But they're not all in agreement. Let's put it like that. I'm pretty sure they're not all in agreement, and that maybe it's our biggest hope that something might go wrong in this.
I think I experience a lot of cognitive dissonance when we talk calmly about a system that is clearly absurd.
Right.
Why are we calm?
We're talking about a clearly deranged, unsustainable system. In sort of casual, wonkish terms, and I think it doesn't really. It's hard to talk about it in calm terms without delivering the severity of the situation, but to talk about it in emotional terms makes you look like a kook. And I feel a cognitive dissonance between these, trying to figure out how to balance, is this as bad as it seems? And if it is there an alternative? Is there something that could be done other than this?
It is definitely as bad as it is, right? I'm pretty sure. I look at it like, I hate to personalize guilt. I hate to say, oh, it's Schwab's fault, or because I think that is silly conspiracy theory, right? I mean, I really believe that. I think I'm more into understanding how the system works, how the system develops, and how the system develops to a point where it's bound to collapse, because there's no room for further development. And I think that's where we are. All great systems, all great empires, if you think about the Roman Empire, they developed up to a point where they couldn't go any further. And the problem tends to be all the time that they constantly deny that there's a problem, right? There's this denial of the problem itself. So they continue to do exactly what has led them to a crisis. They decide to be blind towards the problem itself, right? And I think with capitalism, with the capitalist system as we know it, we are very much in that situation where all this money printing is denial. It's denial of the fact that the system is unable to sustain itself, to reproduce itself in the way it reproduced itself up until maybe 30 or 40 years ago, right? Now it's incapable of doing it for reasons that we can discuss, and I have my own explanation for it.
I would love to hear it.
Yeah, the system is unable to reproduce itself because, here we need to understand what capitalism is. Capitalism is based on human labor, right? It's the exploitation or the employment of human labor. Now, since the 1980s, more labor has been displaced from the system than reabsorbed into it. And that's simply because capitalism needed more and more technology and less labor, right? But by doing that, it not only damaged, of course, the workers, it also damaged itself, because real wealth, real profits, real money is created through the employment of labor. That's where you get real growth. You don't get real growth in the financial sector, you get real growth by employing labor. And unfortunately, or simply because, I think it's an evolutionary thing, right? I don't think it's a choice. At one point, there was all this technology that businesses could use to increase their profits. They've invested in technology and they've disinvested in labor. And that has undermined the ability of capitalism itself to create wealth. And it's been happening since the 1980s.
So it's artificially supplemented with these trillions of dollars.
Exactly. Third industrial revolution, digitalization, beginning in the 1980s, that coincided with the growth, the inflating of the financial sector, because more and more capital was going into the financial sector than in the real economy. So simply because the real economy was less and less profitable, because there was less and less labor there.
Right.
And the point is that you need to employ labor in order to create profits, to create surplus value, and then once you sell the commodity, you create profits out of it. But if you don't have people working, you don't give them money to spend, you never realize profits, basically, right? So I think we need to think in systemic terms. Think about the system evolving in a certain way, but in a kind of implosive way, because since the 1980s, fundamentally, there's been a contraction in the capacity of capitalism to create wealth in the real economy. And that contraction, as you just said, has been counteracted by the growth, the inflation of the financial sector. But overall, it's bad news for the system itself because, of course, the volatility of the financial sector means that it's prone to, these kind of crises. The 2008 one was the first one, the really bad one, the first big crisis. Denial of the problem. We've gone back to using the same medicine, the same treatment. And now we've had in 2019, another 2008, basically after 10 years of kind of honeymoon, easy money kind of capitalism. And then we got to the point where the only way we can sustain the situation is, I think, through a kind of authoritarian transformation.
Darren,
so we're moving to authoritarian or totalitarian type of capitalism, which is the one I've kind of discussed before. Very few people controlling everything, and the others more or less reduced to.
It seems we're heading that way rather dramatically.
We're definitely heading that way. People are not fully realizing that this is already happening, right? This is really already happening, and it seems unstoppable at the moment. Obviously, the hypnotic value of the COVID crisis has helped also in that respect, because people only think about COVID and they don't even realize what's going on around them, or they're starting to realize now, obviously, because inflation, for example, is eating into their money and the savings and whatever. So they're starting to realize that there's a problem, but insofar as they can be hypnotized by emergencies,
right.
So we have two listener questions right now. Participants, Darren from, who I believe is also in the UK. Darren says, so you think our only hope is that the tyrants fall out of love with each other?
I don't think that's the only hope, right? I don't think that's
like people are just going to realize that it's all bogus, and then they'll just roll over and be like, okay, you can have the planet back.
No, I think one mistake we often make is to credit them with too much intelligence, too much. They are a bunch of idiots fundamentally. They are what I call kind of bureaucrats of capitalism. They just do it because they're used to doing it, and they don't have a plan.
She describes it like an app game.
That was what came to me when I began to understand.
They just need to make the numbers go up to win.
They are bureaucrats. They are functionaries.
It's an endorphin rush for constant gain and more gain than last time.
And they're so invested into the system. Their lives and everything depends on continuing along that path, that they don't even dream for a second that there's something wrong with it necessarily, and when they realize, it's too late. So, or some of them obviously know, but they have no other ways of doing things. They continue to go along. And it's been like that in the past as well. It's not something new. Humanity is it's a bit stupid in that respect.
So we have a second question.
Okay.
Before you go.
The capitalist mechanism, as it were, is stronger than human will in many ways.
At this point, it seems very much the case. You have another question?
Yeah, Paul on YouTube asks if the professor, his words, not mine, has if the professor has heard of Nesara or Gesara. It's like all caps, Nesara. Or Gesara. Have you?
What is it? No, if you can. No, I haven't.
She's looking
NESARA, the National Economic Security and Recovery Act. And GESARA is Global Economic Security and Reformation Act.
Huh.
Have you heard of those things?
But I haven't looked into it at all.
Wow.
My information is more.
It's a global prosperity program on the verge of being announced and activated.
Oh, that sounds.
I didn't ask
Orwellian.
Yeah.
I don't want it.
There's a lot of things going on like that, right? They will try to make us believe that that's the best way forward for everybody. The moment people lose their jobs, they will be given money from central banks, probably. Now they are thinking very hard about central bank digital currencies, which is a wonderful way to control how money is spent and used. So it's a form of slavery, fundamentally, right? So they're thinking long and hard about that. They're very open about it. Like all big, central bankers, and they are already preparing that next move, which will involve eliminating physical cash and imposing digital money, which means that they can control us completely. And they are, in that sense, they can sell it to us as something very positive, that it's going to help us or it's going to help somebody.
It's the Chinese style social credit system seems to be where they're moving on purpose.
I think so.
And it goes hand in hand. So like this unusual thing that BlackRock said maybe should happen before the money hit the street.
Right.
It sounds like that you're saying that this pandemic narrative needed to put the economy into a coma until they figured out what they were doing next. And yet putting it into the coma is setting the stage for an agenda that's been coming for 30 years, which is the digital ID and a social passport, so that if you are not compliant, then you no longer get to participate. And so the pandemic narrative is just a lens through which to enact something that has been in the books for a long time, correct?
Yeah, absolutely correct. I think it really is about, it's about kind of protecting, in the short term, protecting the system from hyperinflation and from potential implosion because of that.
Which feels inevitable.
But also preparing the next stage, right? Preparing the attack, as it were. So defense and attack at the same time. Attack means precisely creating those conditions you were talking about. For example, digitalization. They need time to prepare the digital infrastructure and impose it on all of us. If you think about COVID passes, etc., they're already a step into it, because we are linked into the system through blockchain technology. Will make that even stronger. I think if we continue like this, we'll soon realize that we're fucked, basically.
I want to hear your thoughts on, there's the famous speech by Dwight Eisenhower when he left office that said, beware the military-industrial complex. And then a few years later, people within the military-industrial complex most likely conspired to kill a sitting president that wanted to talk about peace. The military-industrial complex has been defining American foreign policy. It is the American foreign policy since when wasn't it? Since post-World War II. So
Post-World War II?
Pretty much. We didn't really have the military-industrial complex before then. We had a military, but we didn't have that complex. Yes. So I've been hearing people, and I went down a rabbit hole to look into, I heard the term medical-industrial complex. Mm-hmm. And Big that pharma, has been something that won't leave me alone now, is that I heard that the military-industrial complex, as the narrative of war becomes less fashionable, there has to be a transfer of power, and the medical-industrial complex feels like the new version of the military-industrial complex, where things are invented to keep up the relevance of the complex.
Yes.
Some people are not calling it public health; they're calling it disease management.
Right. I think there's an obvious point there to make about wars not being kind of useful as they used to be, because if you have a war now, who's going to be alive after a war like we can do today? If there's a world war today, then it's the end.
Game over.
Game over. But we have other types of warfare. For example, the pandemic. That's another kind of work. It does exactly what wars used to do. It allows central banks to print and to inflate. So it's very, very similar mechanism, as a matter of fact. It's a different type of warfare, but it has very much the same effect. I would say very similar effect. And so it's there's this term creative destruction, which is a famous German economist called Joseph Schumpeter used to use a lot. The idea is that capitalism needs to destroy in order to create and to advance to the next stage, also in terms of technological developments and so on and so forth. And in a sense, you can think of the pandemic also as a kind of creative destruction, maybe in the way you've just signaled it. Like, yeah, the pharmaceutical industry now is becoming more and more prominent. If you think how much
they've dictated our lives. They've dictated our lives for 2 years.
They spend more than anybody else on lobbying, for example, more than big oil.
On both parties.
They are incredibly powerful, but we still need to think. We still need to put that into the context of the financial economy, the financial sector being the place that dominates everything, absolutely everything today.
So Darren on Twitch would love to hear Fabio's thoughts. Oh, I just lost it. It's blowing up over here. Would love to hear Fabio's thoughts on why they are doing this so fast. It feels panicked the last 2 years, unless it was always the plan, but there's so much being pushed on the people. Surely, from their point of view, too many people are waking up for their comfort.
Yes, but that goes back to what I was saying about them not being fully in control, right? They are trying to exercise control over the situation. I tend to think that the pandemic scenario was planned. It was planned for a while. We had the 2009 pandemic, which didn't work out. Only very few people. They could only claim very few deaths, right? At that time, yeah, they didn't really. But and then they were trying, and they were trialing. They were simulating it. They've been simulating it up until October 2019. There was a big simulation then.
The SPARS pandemic, right?
Event 201.
Oh, I was thinking of
Event 201,
the John Hopkins SPARS pandemic.
So again, I think they had it in, up their sleeve for a while, and they were waiting for the right time to execute it. They knew. I think they knew what they were doing. Yes, there's a degree of panic because the situation is extreme at the moment, right? I think we are really reaching the end of a trajectory, of a long trajectory, and they know that. Somehow they know that, but they can't stop. There's no way that they can turn back and say, look, there's a mistake here. We gotta do something else. It's impossible. They're not gonna do it. So we are facing very, 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 very difficult times, definitely. But also exciting because there's a possibility that something else might come along, right? There's some kind of different different social bond, different discourse that might organize our lives differently, not around the ideals that are now clearly obsolete, that they don't work in terms of sustaining us any longer. They don't create a society, they destroy society. So
Chris
it's not
Hedges,
up to me to say what will do it, but there's an opportunity. When there's a crisis, there's an opportunity also for radical change, right? I think that's what it's becoming more and more. This is not just a cyclical crisis of capitalism, right? Normally you get cyclical crisis and then we go back to the same. Here we are going, I think this is a terminal crisis, right? It's a proper terminal disease. It's not going to recover unless it turns authoritarian or totalitarian.
Which seems to be where it's going. But can you do you have something in your head where you could see a positive outcome? At the beginning of this pandemic, there was a professor out of Canada, Vervecchi, and he talked about what he called the meaning crisis and the idea of the kairos versus the chronos. The kairos being a moment in time where things can change. And when they did the lockdown, I thought this is that moment where we could actually re-examine the system and do something different. It felt very positive to me because I still wasn't sure of the whole story. So I'm like, we get to take 2 weeks off, reassess, figure out if we want to go to that job, figure out if we want to do these things, figure out, do I really want to keep doing what I'm doing? It felt like a tremendous opportunity for change.
I felt exactly the same as you.
Yeah, a new change. What could a new change look like? I often think about the Velvet Revolution, if maybe you could think about that. When the Soviet Union's power collapsed, then the local power was toothless. And the people just walked in and said, nope, out. We're doing something else now. Can you envision something like that happening on a larger scale at this juncture?
First of all, I have to say that I had that utopian sort of hope or moment also in terms of kairos and not chronos during the lockdown, because it was almost like a different time dimension that had come in.
Right.
And one that would allow us to disconnect, from the rat race, and think a different structure, right? Maybe there's room to think. And I was hopeful that I even wrote a piece that I thought, wow, this is a different time here.
Unplug it and plug it back in.
Yeah, but unfortunately, we were plugging straight back in.
Yeah.
So we were not really. It was a bit of an illusion, I have to say, and maybe a naive one as well. But inevitably, it was felt, and I think a lot of people felt it, and maybe it gave a lot of people the feeling that there's another way of living, right? You don't have to have the stupid job like necessarily, and you can do something different with your time.
Right.
You can exchange, you can create your livelihood in a different way, not one that employed, and I think that will slowly, I think it will come. People will slowly realize it. I think a lot of people have already realized it. From what I hear about a lot of people not going back to their jobs.
Oh, yeah.
In the States, particularly, I hear a lot about that in the States. I don't know whether it's true or not, but it's
it broke a spell
as a phenomenon.
Yeah.
They found they had to survive in other ways,
right?
And so they figured out how to, and then they realized that they could have meaning and also survive.
Yeah.
And they're like, "Fuck you."
Yeah. I think this will come. It will need a different social structure. It will need a different understanding of a community, a different understanding of livelihood, of work, even, right?
These are the things I'm interested in. Yeah.
Work cannot go back to being what work is for capitalism any longer. It's not working.
I think we keep getting fascinated by the story and the slow motion train wreck, and it feels like we're going to allow entities like the World Economic Forum to create the next iteration in culture, which they have a lot of money, power, influence to do, is to create the new culture.
Yeah.
Where we should be doing that.
Right.
We should be imagining what could be done differently. And I think that's why I wanted to ask you these questions. I wanted to figure out if you can see a vision of how, when that moment happens where the spell breaks, where people realize it's an unsustainable system. And we're not just talking about the financial system, because it ties into work, it ties into education, it ties into politics, it ties into media, it ties into technology. The whole thing is of a piece. So when we're talking about a system collapse, we're talking about something that could happen suddenly and completely across all sectors of life.
Yeah.
And is there a way to prepare ourselves for that moment so that we could step in with new visions instead of just taking the one size fits all from the World Economic Forum? I mean, are you following people that have these ideas?
They have a plan for us, definitely. They know that they cannot use us in employment any longer as much as we worked in the past. They can put us in front of the television, on the sofa. They can write us a check every month so that we survive and we consume, right? Because we need to continue to consume. But then, as long as we're under control and they know what we're doing and they know how we're spending their money, they're fine with it. So they have a plan that involves inevitably involves taking people off work, redundant people, so universal credit and things like that. They already are going to do that. That will work in their favor.
Are you personally against universal basic income?
I'm not necessarily against it. No, I'm not necessarily against it. I think it can work. It can help people even to think, and they can give them a space to think in a different way. But they want to use it so that they can control people more and more, right? It's our money. We give you the money. We want to know how you spend it. We want to know what you do with it. If you misbehave, we're going to give you a bit less next time.
Well, the QR code tied to it.
Universal basic income tied to a chip is
very, makes it problematic.
Very powerful.
Yeah.
The moment the moment they can control the flow of money, then they can control everything. And that's what I think they want to do. But in terms of real alternatives, I can think of, it's difficult to have the shopping list, because these are moments where things have to create and develop almost spontaneously. It's difficult to, but I can see sort of alternative communities to begin to grow locally, perhaps initially, and then create networks that go beyond the local and start cooperating with themselves. I think that's the only way in which a meaningful resistance to what's going on can be successful. I don't think a kind of head-on resistance can do much here. I'd love to see that, but I struggle to see how it could beat them. Right?
When you say head-on resistance, you mean like going to the streets,
right?
And saying, "Hey, stop that."
Yeah. Well, I still appreciate that when I see it, and I, myself, but I don't think there's going to be much joy out. I mean, you definitely cannot vote yourself out of this situation, right? That's one thing.
Right.
That's for sure. Politically, there's nothing you can do. I don't think you can vote yourself, elect somebody who's going to do what you want them to do.
Do you feel as though that's the case in Europe, in European countries as well?
Absolutely everywhere. To see how the left has sort of totally abandoned the scene and sort of joined those in power, it's remarkable. The last 30, 40 years, there's been one betrayal after the other. And they now are, totally co-opted into the power structure.
Dramatically so.
Dramatically, there's nothing we can hope from them. Absolutely, only idiots can hope something from this kind of political left, I think.
Well, it feels like all the liberal democracies have just done an orbit into a proto-fascist,
right,
non-democratic, top-down authoritarian system.
Yeah,
like
and
it
the
just
left is
happened.
part of it. The left is totally part. Look at their reaction to this crisis. They are all, in support of this narrative that hypnotizes people. Politically, I think there's very, very little space. There's nothing we can do. But
using the system is what you're saying. To use the mechanism of the broken system to fix the broken system is not going to happen.
Because after a certain point, the system is paid for.
Yes,
it's bought
the
by
system
someone.
Has co-opted
it's bought by someone.
The left has co-opted the left, and the left has let itself be co-opted by the system, and now they're all sharing power and doing what doesn't make any difference whether you're green, red, blue, whatever. The system is going to continue regardless, and so I think the alternative would be to create some kind of, or these things I think will begin to emerge, this kind of parallel societies and parallel social communities where you can begin to organize your life in a way that is not directly connected with the profit-making machine, which is now very, destructive of society itself, clearly.
So you're talking about decoupling labor,
right,
from that machine for its own self-interest, and having human labor go towards building parallel institutions that might better serve us than the predatory labor system.
Yeah, because you need to reinvent the meaning of labor here, obviously, right?
Right.
Because the great invention of capitalism since the very beginning was labor. So capitalism created a quantifiable type of labor and said, if you work for 12 hours, I will pay you so and so. That's the way in which the capitalist system began, and kind of snapping out of the feudal system. All of a sudden, labor was, in a sense, laborers were free, but only free to sell their labor for a certain amount of money. And I think the crucial very clever creation of capitalism was to equate a certain amount of labor to a certain amount of money. That's the kind of original fiction, if you like, that created capitalism, because only through that equation you can then exploit labor. You can pay them for 10 hours and make them work 12 hours, so you can extract profit out of it
and change the value of $12.
Right.
So you're getting paid $12 and have always been paid $12, while the dollar has gone down in value, and people just continue to think they're getting paid $12 because that's what's on the check.
But I think that idea of labor is now obsolete. It's not, as I was saying, it's not creating enough. Even looking at it from the perspective of the exploiters, it's not working anymore.
It's not going to. What would
it's
a
not,
new
because it
definition?
doesn't create enough profit, and so that profit cannot trickle down, to go back to that image, and cannot support society, the infrastructures, and then states are in debt. The debt is this is a debt society, right? I mean, we are so indebted that we struggle to pay interest on that. So it's not working, and it won't continue to work for. So labor itself needs to reinvent itself.
What would that look like?
This equation any longer.
Yeah, what would that look like if you what's the new definition of labor? Or
well, that's interesting. That we need to come up with a different sort of value attached to labor, which is not necessarily quantifiable as something that you can pay for, because that's the capitalist trademark. This is the capitalist trademark. Is we set you free to work for us, and we create an equivalence between the time you work and the money you get paid, right? It's a quantifiable, scientifically quantifiable almost. This goes hand in hand with the scientific discourse, incidentally, right? This idea of quantifying human life. Human life cannot be fully quantified, right? It's just ridiculous if you think about it. How can you quantify labor? It's a fiction. It's something that's been imposed on us, and we now believe, and the whole world has been running on this fiction for a long time. But now it's not working any longer. So labor itself has to reinvent its value.
There has to be, and there has to be a reevaluation of values.
Right, of values attached to labor. So we need to think about social values. We need to think about other things, not necessarily monetary values.
Are you familiar with the Hansi Freinacht and the meta-modernists, or the meta-modernist movement?
No.
This cat Hansi Freinacht, he talks about this idea of parallel institutions, and when we think of capital, we think of money or an asset, a house, some kind of tangible or intangible financial model. And he invites us to sort of change our ideas of different kinds of capital. Social capital. If you're good with people, that should be a kind of capital you could use to negotiate the world with. If you're super sexy, you have sexual capital that could be used to get things, do things, influence things. If you're funny, you have a way to educate or connect people in different ways. And those different kinds of capitals, these are what I'm thinking of when I hear about new values of labor. It means being able to value things that are decoupled from the almighty dollar, and realizing that as a social activist, somebody who can actually take a complex story, break it down to a simple story so people can see the problem that needs to be addressed, which is often, I feel like, the people don't even know what the problem is right now.
Right.
So they can't even think about creating a solution to the problem because they can't get their heads wrapped around it. I really think that there's so much corruption in the system that most people are too nice and too kind and too loving and too empathetic to imagine that there's this level of fuckery going on. And so if they can't imagine it, they can't conceive of a solution to it.
Yeah. I agree. I think there's also a degree, once again, of denial. People kind of sense that there's something wrong, but they're so scared of losing what they have, including the sense of being, their identity within the system. They repress that knowledge. They pretend that it's not there. So
cognitive dissonance.
Yes, cognitive dissonance. They don't want to face the fact that things are not working. But I think the idea, like calling it capital, suggests to me that we're still thinking of it in terms of kind of monetary entity, right? Where I'm thinking of labor as something that people need to work, right? I mean, we do work intellectually all the time. We're working now in a sense.
But there's a
right?
difference between work that you do in order to have the basic necessities of living, and then there's work that you do because it's something that you desire to do, because it's something you're passionate about, because it's something that you want to contribute to your community.
Pursuit of happiness.
Like those are two different kinds of work. I absolutely think people need meaningful projects and labor and challenges.
Absolutely.
But I don't think people need work as in they need to be at Burger King.
You don't need to do a stupid job to get paid in order to want. That's I think that idea is now, I think, slowly but surely becoming obsolete, and people will probably realize it. The problem is what comes next, right? Because I think, as you say, people need to be challenged, need to be inspired, need to desire, all this is related to working as well, right? The idea of working and
a healthy idea
laboring.
of work.
Yeah.
But the problem is that the problem is that the capital has created its own labor. It's there's a very nice way of putting it. I think that the moment you think of capital as creating labor as part of itself. If you think about it, capital became capitalism when it created labor so that it could profit from it and create wealth out of it, right? That's the kind of subterfuge, the little trick that the first capitalists used effectively to move out of the contradictions of the feudal system and into modernity, capitalist modernity, where individuals were free, but they were free to sell the labor to the owner of the means of production, who would employ you in order to exploit you and to create wealth out of your labor. But now this is not working.
It feels like a grayscale.
Things are just rearranging themselves in my brain live.
No, because I've been really kind of I wrote a book about it called Unworkable, incidentally, which is coming out soon. And I look at the start of how capitalism started sort of not only created itself, but started to become a social discourse that kind of controlled everything else, controlled society and created new values and so on and so forth. And to me, the key moment, it really is the creation of wage labor. You know, the creation of wage labor is a capitalist invention.
Right. Instead of you working on your farm to have the things you need for your life, now you're working on someone else's farm, and then you take the money you earn from that to go buy the things from the farm you worked on.
Right. That's very good. Very good. I think that's exactly it. That's exactly it. And you're creating capital, you're creating profits, and then that, you know. So the moment this mechanism stops working, you know, there's a problem for everyone.
So Mokai in South Africa asks,
wow,
do you think the travel bans on countries like with South Africa was an effort to keep money in circular flow and not entirely based on health reasons?
Yeah, I think it's, I mean, this is one of the industries that has been obviously damaged the most by lockdowns and so on and so forth. And it's again, a way of controlling money circulation, the velocity in which money circulates. And therefore it's a deflationary measure. I've been traveling to Italy in December, beginning of December, and I've never seen anything like that. Like empty airports, nobody around, cities like Milan or empty, literally empty, like ghost cities, you know, ghost towns. There's nobody around. There's no money circulating. And then you suddenly realize, yeah, they don't want us. It's paradoxical, isn't it? Because up until a few years ago, you thought, yeah, consumer capitalism, that's what it's all about. You got to enjoy, spend. Now we've entered a different stage where they're saying, hang on a second, you know, you need to spend, but the way we want you to spend.
Well, they've got it reduced down to just spending on testing all day long.
Right.
As a part of the medical industrial complex. You can just spend your money on your neurosis.
Right. Yes, exactly. But I think ultimately we've had this it's deflationary. It has the effect of not only controlling people's lives in a kind of biopolitical way, but also in a very concrete way controlling the movement of money.
Biopolitical.
Yeah. Sorry, it's one of those terms that we hear again and again, right?
I don't want that either.
No, neither do I.
John on Facebook is proposing this all stems from the next cultural change, the automated revolution. The system is trying to eliminate human error, and the preparation is going to be down through human systems integrations. It's going to be important to determine what people will be in control of the machines that handle everyday operations.
Very good.
Who was that?
I totally agree.
John Ivankovich.
Yeah. Right on.
I think that's a really key point. Who's going to control? Because if you think about it, we don't need to work as hard as we used to produce the goods, right? Any longer. Machines can do it more and more. Intelligent machines, AI now. So the problem will be who controls those machines. Maybe there needs to be some kind of socialization of the means of production. I know it sounds very socialist and very old-fashioned again as a term, but why not, right? Some kind of socialization of the means of production, some kind of organization around that idea. That the means of production are shared socially amongst the people rather than owned by few people who are controlled by other people on top of them, and so on and so forth.
This weekend, as part of our current unit study, we've been watching the 3 Zeitgeist movies from 2007 to 2012. They're free on YouTube.
Yeah.
Anybody can watch them. They're documentaries. They're a particular documentary team's perspective on the information that they've gathered about the U.S. and global affairs and human culture as it is being overruled by finance and run by profit, and what profit needs in order to continue is scarcity. And so we'll never have, as long as profit is God, we're never going to have a society that is truly abundant and efficient, because advances in technology would create abundance and efficiency, but they would also diminish profit margin.
Yeah.
So that's been a shifting in my head, that like if we want to have a fully automated system where humans don't have to do bullshit jobs and can instead do jobs that they really care about, it involves more technology, and that means that we have to be okay with not as much profit, because as things get more and more efficient, you
right. Yes, no, I agree. The key issue is that of power. Once again, right? We don't think about power any longer, but power is crucial. Who's holding, who's holding power? Who has the power there when all that technology is doing the work essentially? Who's in control of the machines?
I think it starts with information and the internet too. I think when we lost net neutrality, and then Google decided that they were no longer going to use the phrase "don't be evil." Right. They just decided that they were not going to do that anymore. It seems that I think we should be having more conversations about how do you socialize a social network that we rely upon, so that the TOS to participate is not at odds with the Bill of Rights.
Right.
Google has been changing information. Wikipedia has been changing information. They've just been deleting things that don't go along with the narrative. Deleting people, deleting information that was readily available 2 years ago. And legitimate. It was legitimate, and then certain things have been delegitimized, and I don't think it has been on the up and up. So I don't think when we start talking about the idea of nationalizing or socializing certain things that we get benefit from, like I think we need to start with the internet. I think it's our means of communication with each other.
Right. Yeah.
And if people cannot search what's actually happening in the world, that was the whole promise of this technology. You could go there and find out. And now there are blocks.
Yeah. Or there's an algorithm that already finds the answers they want for your search, right? So you get like 5 or 6 pages with the same kind of information again and again and again, until you convince yourself that that's the only truth. Right. Whereas, you can't find what you're looking for really, because they already organize the answer and they already give you the answer through an algorithm. So I think that's been a massive shift in the perception of freedom that we had attached to the internet and these search engines and Wikipedia is another one that it's not free, clearly not free, right? But we always thought that that's a nice source of information. We go and find our information there. All of a sudden we realize that it's all bullshit, that actually it's controlled, like Google and so on, they clearly are. You're right, like freeing those, the potential of communication.
Yeah, because we can't communicate with each other if we're Googling different realities.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Like if you're living in a different, like your socioeconomic, religious status is going to give you a feed that I don't get.
Yeah.
And then we're going to argue because we don't have access. We actually don't have access to all the information. Yeah, I think that's like one of those, hey, maybe we should start there.
Since Google's contract tells employees that they can be fired for failing to abide by the motto, "Don't be evil," it must have meaning. Google did not immediately return a request for comment. The "Don't be evil" principle is often attributed to 2 early employees, Paul Buchheit and Amit Patel. Coincidentally, the move to change the slogan "Don't be evil" came at the same time dozens of Google employees resigned after the company continued its association with the U.S. military. These employees cited ethical concerns and warned that autonomous weapons directly contradicted the firm's famous "Don't be evil" motto.
Yeah, there's a lot of... Oh my God.
Why are you spying on me, Google?
That really plays into the discussion about communication. I come from a psychoanalytic background in many ways. I'm a great fan of Jacques Lacan, who was a French psychoanalyst who kind of followed up from Freud.
I was just going to ask you about this. So
yeah.
yes, perfect.
You asked me.
Bond.
Yeah, discourse.
I just want to turn into a bumper
social.
sticker.
Yeah, discourse is social bond.
Discourse
I want to know what that
social
means.
bond, and it's being ripped away from us.
Yeah, I think like from a Lacanian perspective, Lacan was a psychoanalyst, but he was a philosopher as well, and he clearly was not just about the one-to-one in the clinic. It wasn't just about the clinic, but it was about the social bond, as he called it, right? The social link or the social bond, which really is about discourse for him. Discourse is the social bond, and in a sense, for him, discourse is inevitable. As soon as you have language, you have a discourse. Language is the kind of elementary form of alienation. We are kind of, as he put it, we are spoken by language. We're never really fully in control of language. We're really never fully in control of communication. We communicate all the time because we miss each other. We never, we misunderstand each other, right? If we understood each other, we wouldn't have to communicate any longer. Let's say we understand each other.
Yeah.
But there's something in language which we can't fully control. It's actually the opposite. Language is speaking through us, as it were. As it uses a paradox that he uses a lot. But the fundamental point is that every discourse, every social discourse is based fundamentally on language. Language itself is a fiction. We know that, right? Language is not something that exists in nature. Our language, we've invented it, and it's a system of signs that we believe in. We have to believe in order to communicate and to create a social bond. But I think for it's interesting what he says about. I always try to historicize his discourse theory a little bit. I like to historicize it a bit. So he talks about discourse of the master, discourse of the hysteric, discourse of the analyst, discourse of the university, and then he talks about discourse of capitalism in the early 70s. And it doesn't talk much about it, but what it says is very intriguing, because it says that it's a kind of discourse without discourse. It's something that seems to function perfectly well. Without any interruptions, without any break, without any because the prerogative of discourse is that it fails, right? There's a lack in it. At some point, it fails.
Why?
There's an impotence, as it were, in discourse, because as I said at the beginning, we cannot fully control language.
Language can only go so far.
Right.
It only represents the thing and isn't the thing.
Yeah, exactly. Right. But with capitalism, it's almost as if language doesn't matter, because the system is almost, in a way, beyond language. It's based on a discourse which is paradoxically discourseless. It's about creating. Well, we need to kind of. I don't want to go into too much detail because it gets complicated, but it's practically about the idea that a discourse is created between a subject and an other, right? You have to have a connection, a linguistic connection between subject and other. But as I said, this connection is never really fully successful. Whenever we speak, we always say something more or less than we want to say, right? And that is not just about the signifiers we use. It's not just about the language we use, but it's about the tone. It's about the perception of our, even the voice, has a massive impact on how communication works, and so on and so forth. So for Lacan, the fundamental issue about language and discourse is that language is needed. It's the elementary form of alienation for us. Without it, we wouldn't be able to create a social bond. But at the same time, it creates something that, by definition, fails. And that failure is also the measure of our freedom, because we can constantly hope to recreate a different social bond, right? Precisely because it fails. If it didn't fail, we would be trapped. We would be caged within one discourse only. So the failure of the discourse is its condition of possibility insofar as it can recreate itself in a different direction. So, for example, when he talks about the discourse of the master in a way is the discourse of tradition, of conservative tradition, where we have symbolic authority, somebody embodying symbolic authority, I don't know, a king, for example. But the more it embodies symbolic authority, the more it also potentially fails. So every kind of powerful entity can also be seen as powerless, right? And that's always happened in history. With capitalism, the funny thing is that power is not visible, almost, right? We don't really know who's in charge. And in a sense, the power of the discourse is disavowed, becomes invisible, and it's taken on by the mechanism itself, by the profit-making machine, which for Lacan, its peculiarity is that it creates an object, which is the commodity, which becomes object of desire, and feeds into the mechanism so perfectly that our desire is co-opted within the discourse itself in the form of desires for commodities.
What do you call it when it's politics? Something choice, contrived choice, or something like that.
Oh.
You say it all the time.
I know.
About hey, you get to vote for Trump or Biden. You have a choice.
Oh, it's a prescribed choice.
Yeah, prescribed choice. Yeah.
And we have these in almost every area of our lives without realizing that we're not truly free to make choices.
Yeah, in a sense, the capitalist system manages to hide its own impotence, and it's hidden it very well for many centuries, perhaps, right? Precisely by eliminating the figure of power. So you don't have the figure of power in front of you. You don't have a king in front of you. You have a mechanism which now it's kind of naturalized into our lives. We've internalized it so much that we cannot really distinguish it from what we are, even, right? So our desire, for example, tends to be desire for commodities or desire for work in order to buy commodities and so on and so forth, right? So
or to buy time.
Yeah.
So you actually have your own time.
Right. Have you ever watched Adam Curtis's documentaries through the BBC?
What's he called again?
Adam Curtis.
Yeah.
Adam Curtis is a documentarian that has produced several documentaries over the last couple of decades through the BBC, and they're free on YouTube. YouTube has cut out a couple of scenes for being too graphic.
Right.
But in general, you can see the entire documentary for free on YouTube. And he takes all of this archival footage and just weaves the story together of this politician was in this country when this upheaval was happening, and then they went to this country, and then this financial crisis changed, and that had to do with disco, and that had to do with marijuana, and then people started changing their hairstyles, and now we have women smoking, and obviously that's all out of order. But he does a great job, for me at least, as someone who was taught a very compartmentalized version of history, of just talking about how the planet and the people in power on the planet have been influencing each other over the last 100 years, or slightly more than that now.
Adam Curtis's work, he takes a bunch of we knew these stories from history, but then he sort of lays the layer back to see how they were not disconnected. I really like his work. It's very he has his lovers and his haters, but it's narrative storytelling is what it is. Narrative storytelling by looking at things that you knew separately, but you never put together as a thing. Anyway, I like his work a lot.
But so going back to what I was saying quickly, it's we're talking about capitalism, we're talking about also science at the same time, because science plays a big part in, I think today we see it very clearly, right? Science becomes a kind of new authority, new form of authority. In the past, we had symbolic authorities, like people representing power, for example, very clearly in front of everybody else. And as I said, power was also the mirror of its impotence all the time, right? Because you could cut the king's head or something. The moment. But when you don't see that any longer, you have today power as a kind of scientific form of objectivity almost, right? Science as a new kind of authority, which is not based on symbolic authority. So, you're coming from a certain family and embodying power in a certain way. It's got to do with a certain idea of objectivity. We're supposed to believe it because it's objective, right? And science, I think, together with capitalism too, create this idea of power as something invisible and something that has morphed into a kind of objective system that we can't contrast really. We can't really fight any longer. In fact, a system that can only implode, right? It cannot be attacked from outside. It can only implode out of its own arrogance almost, right? It becomes so global now that there's no way we can think of an external force unless we believe in aliens or something, right? They can come and destroy the capitalist system. It's almost like it can only destroy itself through implosion by itself, right?
I think it's so inconceivable to most people. I mean, I have a hard time getting my head wrapped around the scale of it.
What's inconceivable?
Just the idea that most people would never admit that they could be subjected to propaganda.
Oh, nobody likes to think that they've been brainwashed.
No. Nobody wants to think they've been brainwashed. Nobody wants to admit that maybe they got conned in some way, that reality is not exactly as they thought it was, but actually far more complex or far more simple. And when that is the thing that I feel like is... wait, I forgot where I was going.
I did the same thing with the Adam Curtis thing. I was saying something about Adam Curtis because of something that Fabio was saying, and then I just completely blanked why I was bringing it up.
I don't want to be as difficult to keep, but I think it's the basic point is that if you don't have a representative of power in front of you, you're even more fucked, basically, because you're enslaved into a mechanism which has become objective for you and real, objective, internalized as a mechanism. And you cannot simply sort of attack power. Where is power? We don't even know who runs BlackRock, for example. We don't really know exactly who's behind the scenes. We are told that we should believe certain authorities, but these authorities are not traditional symbolic authorities any longer. They are, for example, science. And science, the authority of science comes from it's the assumption that it's objectively true, right? Which is a false assumption, because science, in fact, has got nothing to do with that idea. Science it's all about experimenting and trying and desiring and finding out something new and making mistakes and without that, there's no science.
Science is a question.
When we
not
talk
an
about
answer.
science, we're talking about scientism, which is something different. The belief that science is a form of objective truth, right?
Yep.
And I think that's what makes, in a sense, the power that we have in front of us even more invincible from that point of view, because it's kind of turned into some kind of objective discourse, not a subjective discourse, not the discourse of somebody who embodies power, but the whole mechanism, the whole kind of system is objectively it, but how to attack it, how to kind of, it's very difficult to find the enemy.
Isn't that sort of mirrored in the idea of the war on terror? Because that's just a concept. You're at war with a political device, which could be assigned to anybody, anywhere, at any time, depending on who's making the assignment.
Absolutely. But I think that's the other interesting paradox when the system becomes so global and so total, right? Almost total, literally occupies all spaces. There's nowhere else to go. Then the only way that it can reproduce itself is by creating an enemy,
right?
An external enemy, because it needs that enemy desperately in order to. Otherwise, it's left alone with itself and with its own contradictions. The contradictions can always be externalized onto an enemy. If you say, "Oh, war on terror," then you're not looking at your own contradictions anymore, but you're blaming the other, in this case, the terrorist. And this is an old trick. Obviously, they if you think about how the Nazis did it with the Jews, you get to the same kind of scapegoat. The enemy is out there. If we defeat the enemy, then everything will be fine. But you know, you always need an enemy. You need a new enemy.
Had you heard about this?
You can think of
sorry, go ahead.
You can think of the virus as the enemy as well, right? As another representation of that enemy, right?
No,
Okay, you
look
say
at the
it.
virus. Oh, look at me.
You say it.
Had you heard about this concept of the mass formation?
Yes, I have.
Before
Yes,
Dr.
yes,
Malone
yes,
talked about it on
yes.
Joe Rogan?
Yeah.
yes. Who hasn't, right? Who hasn't?
Well,
a
people.
apparently a lot
That's
of people
why
had
Wikipedia
not.
had to scrub
Oh,
it.
really? Okay,
Yeah,
sorry.
it's
No,
off.
but here in Europe, yeah.
It's off Wikipedia now.
So what's like?
Yes.
So
Yes, I know.
when it became popular because of Joe Rogan's massive platform, Wikipedia and Google were actually down for half a day scrubbing the results for mass formation in order to redirect them to approved descriptions, much like they scrubbed the definition of terrain theory and turned it into germ theory denialism when that hit the mainstream. So we first heard about mass formation in an interview with Matthias Desmond in October.
That's right.
Yeah. And we should have interviewed him then before he became a hot topic. But I was wondering, so that circulates in Europe, and I'm wondering if maybe the U.S. is able to be brainwashed into being told that mass formation isn't a real psychological concept because it's actually a word or phrase that originated in a different language in Europe.
Yeah.
And so
Yes.
we don't have the phrase mass formation as it's directly translated in English. And that's why people so like, what are some of the local phrases for mass formation? Like
mob psychology or
no, like in
mass psychology,
yes,
mass psychology, perhaps, yeah.
It doesn't
because he talks
exist.
about mass formation psychosis. You know, this method talks about that specifically, and then he kind of breaks it down into hypnosis and so on. I find that really fascinating. I don't think it's particularly new as an idea that there is this kind of psychological control of people. We know that it's been going on for a long time.
No, it doesn't. Experts say it doesn't happen.
yes, experts say it doesn't
All right.
happen.
So, okay, sorry.
Yeah.
Yes.
Mob psychology has been debunked hundreds of times.
My God.
Experts say.
Experts say. Speaking
Experts
of which,
say, I know.
we have someone tuning in on YouTube whose handle is Germ Theory Disrespecter,
Okay.
which I appreciate. I appreciate
right.
that handle.
Right.
Because especially because they renamed terrain theory to be germ theory
Germ
denialism.
theory denialism.
It doesn't even exist. It's just a debunked scientific theory that was in competition with Pasteur. They don't even tell you who it is anymore.
Right.
Yeah.
Terrible.
It was
I
crazy.
didn't realize that.
Yeah.
They erased that guy.
They did that last summer.
I didn't realize that.
Beauchamp? Wasn't
Yeah.
that the guy?
They erased the
Beauchamp,
actual science.
Beauchamp
He's
was-
gone.
yeah.
He's gone.
He's not just
Really?
Yeah. The Wikipedia
Wow.
is
They
I
got
didn't
rid
know.
of. They got
Gosh.
rid of terrain theory. We were talking
That's
about terrain
ridiculous.
theory in
2020.
March, April of 2020, and we're like, well, let's try to see if there's some value to this. And we talked about it quite a bit. And then this year, it's gone. It's
Right.
now not just gone.
I can't believe that. I can believe that. But it confirms like what we were saying before that it's just.
This is why we can't agree on what's going on. Vaccination
gosh.
doesn't mean immunizing.
Here's Wikipedia. Germ theory denialism is the pseudoscientific belief that germs do not cause infectious diseases and that germ theory of disease is wrong. It involves arguing that Louis Pasteur's model of infectious disease was wrong and that Antoine Béchamp was right.
Yeah.
And it's that's
So now
not
it's
what they're
germ
saying.
Because it used to be a massive debate, in science. It's not as if it's a minor one. It's a huge debate.
Another
it's a massive
obsolete
open question, and now it's right. Okay.
Another obsolete variation is known as terrain theory and Another obsolete variation is known as terrain theory and postulates that the state of the internal environment of a person determines if germs cause disease rather than germs alone being the sole cause of it. Which
makes a lot of sense, right?
It's literally science.
I know.
What?
I know.
An obsolete variation.
Yeah.
It's incredible that, yeah.
But
this is the way in
Freaking
which
out.
they are weaponizing science and they're using it as scientism, right? And it's a form of authority. Science said it. Real science said it. How many times have we heard that? But the real science has got nothing to do with these answers. Real science is about testing and trying and trial and error.
I like when they say scientists agree. As if
Right.
all of science
all the
is of
science,
one
yeah.
mind on
Yeah,
this
that's just-
subject.
Guys, we have 13 minutes until we're at the 2-hour mark, just to let you know.
Okay.
Yeah, that's cool. So yeah, that with Desmay, I like it a lot, and I think it's about like he's interested in the how it happens. You know, what makes this narrative possible? Obviously, the idea of mass formation, psychosis, etc. From my angle, I would say also it's important to understand why it has happened, right? Because there's a root cause for this, and I think the root cause is a systemic contradiction that can no longer be hidden.
The terrain was ready.
It can only be hidden if we go down, you know, by these emergency narratives now that are, you know, they're part of power, of the edifice of power.
What's the contradiction that you feel like has been hidden?
The contradiction that I feel like has been hidden is the fact that, as I was saying earlier, the system is unable to produce real wealth in capitalist terms, is increasingly unable to produce the value, economic value, to reproduce itself through it and to reproduce societies.
So that's the lie.
Right? To me, that's the fundamental issue that we're not recognizing, we're not confronting, and that's why the financial system has become so powerful, because there's a fundamental denial of that impotence of the system that is growing more and more impotent, you know, powerless within itself, and is less and less able to create the conditions of possibility of capitalist societies.
It feels like there's
so
just
the financial, sorry.
It just feels like suddenly there's just too many humans.
That is the other problem.
I mean, it's the baby boomer.
Sense.
In the U.S., it's the baby boomer issue. Is you had this mushroom of population that has to be supported by this smaller stem to support all these aging people not working anymore.
Yeah, I mean, but a lot of people would be out of work more and more, because obviously, in terms of the law of competition is still the key law of capitalism. So in order to compete with other businesses, you need to cut the cost of productions. You need to eliminate labor, use technology instead, invest in technology. And so there will be a lot of people who are redundant, quite literally.
That's what it feels like.
Useless humanity for the capitalist system.
If your value is determined by your ability to work and produce.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Right. So there will be a problem insofar as they still need to consume, we still need to provide for them, but they won't be productive themselves. You know, they won't help producing any wealth. So what to do with them? Right. And here we get into conspiracy.
Just let
theories,
them live? What?
Yeah.
Like just be alive?
It's a real issue, right? I mean,
here we get into conspiracy theories.
No, much earlier. Sorry, but I started from the beginning. But no, the idea of eugenics, it's all of a sudden, you know.
Yeah, boom.
Why not? Right? Why not?
Yep.
We know that they've been thinking about it for a while. They've been thinking about it for a long time.
150 years.
Yeah, they've even had some good trials.
Yeah. Exactly.
I think that's a fascinating concept, and we should all reconvene to speak specifically about the very touchy subject of eugenics.
Wow.
Cool.
Yep.
We'll leave it at that.
And euthanasia.
Yeah, I really appreciate you spending your evening with us and having this conversation.
My pleasure.
I'm gonna have to absorb it over time, and I'm really.
Can I ask a few questions?
And also I want you to plug your book and tell people where they can find your work or your book so that people can tune in to get more of what you've been saying.
I found an Amazon link for all of the stuff that you've written, and I encourage people to go to like Powell's Books and buy it instead of from the overlords.
All right.
I think it's more like my recent work on the pandemic. I think I've really enjoyed writing about it. One thing that it's done for me is really kind of created this intellectual desire to go a bit deeper. The rabbit hole has been a good journey. Very frustrating at the beginning, right? Very frustrating because I lost a lot of friends over this. Like friends that I consider really good friends, they're gone. They don't even want to talk to me or listen to me.
I'm so sorry.
But personally, I've also met a lot of people, like-minded people, or people who are interested in this, and they like you. And and I think that's great as well, because you can really make connections now. I think people are more ready to receive certain ideas.
I think this is a good use of labor.
Yeah, I think it really is.
I like this
think
work.
It's intellectual labor. It's going to be crucial, and yeah, I appreciate it, and it's really really nice to get to know you. And I've looked at your website, and I really like what you're doing.
Oh, thank you very much.
The talent is there, right? I can really see that you got lots of talent.
Fabio.
Oh, that's great.
Well, this has been it's just been nonstop. It's been such a good conversation.
I want to
we
go.
Have like so much. We
There's
had
a lot
so
of
many
stubs
people
I
joining
didn't get to
in.
go down,
Like
yeah.
we had so many people joining in. Thank you so much to everybody that participated on YouTube and Twitch and Facebook, and our new friends, Germ Theory Disrespecter.
Yeah.
That's a new friend on YouTube that we have today.
Right.
I appreciate you guys. Take a minute before you leave and hit likes on YouTube, friend me back on Twitch, and put some angry faces on the Facebook video, and think of 3 people that you think would like to participate in these conversations, and just send them a message. Don't spam people, but let them know that we're having a good time over here talking about tough shit, and they might like to also.
Yeah, and sometime in the next few days, I would like for you to maybe consider somebody else that you regard and respect that has some sort of creative vision towards how to get out of the fuckery. And maybe you can suggest some future guests for us that you would like to share with the world.
Sure. Definitely.
Yeah, I really appreciate you being here and being a part of this.
We have a secret question to ask you off camera, so don't end the Zoom meeting.
Okay, I'll stay here.
Yeah. We're going to play a little song and then break away and talk with you privately about our secret research project, Fabio.
All right. Cool. And thanks, everybody, for tuning in, and we'll see you next Sunday.
Yeah, we really appreciate you all.
Yeah.
They'll still be able to hear you talking through this song, just so you know.
Okay, I'll shut up.
Thank you for visiting our Outpost in the Borderlands. Post-Orthodoxy is a project of Sevier Studios. We host ongoing, interactive conversations centered around cognitive liberty, and you can join in by catching one of our live streams on Facebook, YouTube, or Twitch. You can also catch each conversation after the fact as a podcast by searching for Post-Orthodoxy wherever podcasts are found. If you take value from the work we are doing and the community we're building together, you can support the Outpost in the Borderlands for as little as $5 a month on our website, Better Time. That's betterti.me. Visit the Sevier Studios page and subscribe. You can also support The Outpost by following and connecting with us on Facebook, YouTube, Twitch, Twitter, Instagram, and/or Substack. Our Post-Orthodoxy theme music was composed by Frank Pascal, and a special thanks goes to our voice actors, Amelia, Colin, Sbo, Rosie, Gabo, Vicky, Mokai, and Tony.
Thanks for playing.
What's outside your reality bubble? I think I dribbled